What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 173 of Two Amazon Sellers and a Microphone, brought to you by Solozo and NetRush. And today we're going to be taking a little bit different topic. Chris, you and I, we spend so much time talking about private label, talking about launch strategies, PPC automation, PPC strategies, but there's a whole other universe out there of e-commerce sellers, especially on Amazon, people that are in the wholesale game, and repricing is the strategy. It's the name of the game in the wholesale area. So we're excited to talk all about that. And to do that today, we've got the co-founder of Aura, Dillon Carter, is on with us. What's up, Dillon? How are you?
Hey, good guys. How are you?
Good.
Doing great. You said you're up
ready
there
to. Yeah, I'm up here in Boston, so it's nice, cold and windy and rainy. It's wonderful. It's good, but there's a lot of tech talent here.
Yeah, you're getting the snow that we had. It came through Kansas City and then kind of down
exactly.
and shot up in your area.
Exactly. It's lovely. I saw snow for the first time last year in my entire life, so that's cool. But
where were you?
So where were you for?
Yeah. So I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, so Northeast Florida.
Okay.
Was there throughout my entire life. College, whole family's there. Kind of small town mentality, I'd say, or feel vibe, whatever the kids are saying these days. And then, so we actually started the company fully remote in college. Me and my co-founder, we can get into the story here in a bit, actually met on Instagram and started a company together, worked together for a year and a half before actually meeting in person. And once we both graduated college, we're like, hey, we have a legit serious business here. What do we want to do? And we decided to co-locate. We chose Boston for the technical talent. There's MIT here. There's Harvard here. There's a bunch of other massive startups and obviously tech companies here. So we decided to make the move.
That sounds like a good story.
Yeah. We need to definitely dive into that.
Yeah,
for sure.
But start with how you got into wholesale. I mean, what were you doing? All this happened while you were in college. You started wholesaling online and really getting into it. Let's hear how that all transpired.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a roller coaster of a story. So when I graduated high school, so let's back up here. I was labeled as learning disabled at a very young age, like elementary school. So all the context I had of myself intellectually was that I was limited. So I didn't really expect a whole lot out of life, if I'm being honest. And then I started, so I didn't plan on going to college, to be frank. I was like, I'll figure something else out. So I tried a bunch of different things, tried to start a bunch of weird random businesses that just obviously went nowhere because I had no business fundamentals, and eventually started becoming a personal trainer. I started working out, and one of the trainers there was like, hey, you seem to really enjoy this. We need trainers. Why don't you go get certified? So went through that whole process, got naturally certified as a personal trainer, started doing that full time. And just on the weekends, I wanted to play around with something that was more scalable. So I always came back to this conclusion that whatever you do needs to be scalable, right? And this is like a fundamental belief and issue I have with like service-based businesses. You can only scale based on hours. And that's kind of an issue. Like, yeah, you can make massive companies out of service-based businesses where it is, somebody else's time. But honestly, I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to build, at least at that point, 19, 20 years old, I didn't think about having like 20, 30 employees. So I was playing with different ideas, and like most people, I heard about like Amazon selling. So I did what we most typically do. I went to Target and Walmart, started scanning a bunch of things and throwing it up there. I was like, oh, cool. I got sales. Oh, cool. It kind of made money. So I realized that it was the things, and I proved that to myself. So, for me, and what I think a lot of sellers go through is that's the first ungating, right? You're like, okay, it's real. And then it becomes, okay, what do I do now that it is real? And so I spent just all weekends just doing RA, right? So retail arbitrage. And then, didn't get anything sizable, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I was learning a ton. And then I got to a point where me and the GM of the gym just did not see eye to eye on a growth issue. And I decided to move on. And I had a tough decision because I had clients saying, hey, wherever you go, we'll go. And I had the opportunity to start my own like training facility. And I could have done it out of house. I mean, I had so many options and I really enjoyed personal training, and I found a cool niche where I was helping younger kids with confidence. It wasn't just get fit. It was, middle schoolers, high schoolers that were struggling with confidence and self-esteem. And I was helping them through personal training overcome these hurdles. And that was phenomenal. But I was at a fork in the road and I decided, you know what? It's just not for me. It doesn't feel right. I'm just going to figure out this Amazon thing. And that's what I did. And so I spent 10 hours a day sourcing RA until my eyes could bleed. And I would spend the evenings packaging it all up, ripping the Target stickers off, which takes an extra 14 hours for no reason, and shipping things in. And again, I asked the same question, what's more scalable than this? And I came to the conclusion that it was online arbitrage, right? So it's like not that big of a leap, but I'm like, okay, I get RA, I can do it online. That's cool. And so I did that for a little while. And to be honest, it was a real struggle. I mean, it didn't click for me that well for some reason. And so I kind of supplemented with RA, probably 80%, 20% OA. I was like, okay, I'm not really building a business here. Like I'm barely paying the bills. This is tough. And again, another fork in the road. I decided, okay, well, the only real two progressions in my mind is wholesale or private label. So when I looked at what options I had that made sense for me, I went wholesale. Private label to me was like, okay, you need to have at least a few grand that you can kind of burn, right? Like it's a big test and you just don't know. And so I didn't have as many at bats as I would with wholesale, because worst case is like, I know that the listings are existing. I can do some pre-testing. I can buy 20 units, flip it real quick and be like, all right, cool. This is good or this is bad. And so I went the wholesale route for the cash flow. I mean, I needed to live. I needed to eat, to be honest. So that's what I did. Went that route. And at this time I'm in an incredibly toxic relationship, which I don't recommend. And really didn't like the path that I was on personally. So I had to make some tougher decisions. And a few of those were getting out of that relationship, moving back home. I mean, as a early 20s male moving back home, I'm like, hey, like I just need to figure out a few things. So it freed up a lot of time to work on the business, going wholesale. And by the way, I set a hard rule for myself. I said, if I'm going to go wholesale, I got to burn the bridges. And so what I did is I set a rule, which was you're not allowed to buy inventory unless it's wholesale. Even though, I mean, there were profitable things that I could buy every single week, week in and week out that were generating profit. I knew for myself and my personality that I couldn't have that exist. And so I figured it out. And at that time I decided to go back to the school. I was kind of over being a statistic, I went for one semester and then dropped out. I was like, you know what, I'm going to go finish it. And I did. So I went back to UNF in Jacksonville, got my finance degree, was, one of the top students, and that was awesome. But around this time, I'm reaching out to every wholesale Amazon seller I can find on Instagram and just be like, hey, I'll pay you for your time. I'm at 6 figures. You seem to be at 7. Can I pay you for an hour? And then you help me unlock the differences between operating at 6 figures and me going to 7 figures. Cause I wanted to figure it out. And I didn't really know. So that's what I did. And actually my now co-founder and business partner, James, was the first person to say, yeah, sounds good. Don't worry about the money. Like, let's just talk. And so we started meeting once a week on Fridays. We would just hold each other accountable. Be like, hey, you said you're going to do X. Did you do it? Yes or no? And then vice versa. And then eventually found out he was a computer science major. So actual software engineer. And he's like, hey, I got some ideas for software. Like, can we talk? I was like, yeah, sure. So we started talking about what he had built at that point, which was VinDriveCRM.com. And it's funny because we both had wholesale Amazon businesses, but we operated separately, of course. But our internal structures were very similar in terms of, how we're sourcing, the follow-ups. Did we purchase from this? So we had like this CRM built out in either Trello or Google Sheets, Excel. And so basically what he did is he built that into an actual software. So it's very streamlined, hooked up to Amazon's API. So you can pull in ASIN information just a little bit better, right? And so I was like, yeah, this sounds awesome. So came on board. I kind of took on a lot of the growth aspects, customer support aspects. And we built a nice Facebook group of, I think right now it's like 13,000 people, a little over, where, every Tuesday we would do live sourcing. So where people were charging money for this, we're like, hey, let's just teach for free. And if people love it, they'll come on board and join us. So we did that for, 2-ish years. Every Tuesday I would sit down, after class, and I would literally go live in that Facebook group and teach people how to source wholesale live, which kind of sucks sometimes because you find amazing products. Be like, I wish nobody saw this. But yeah, so did that. And we realized, that was such a small niche product. I mean, it's not just Amazon, it's wholesale Amazon sellers who want a CRM. And we're charging $27 a month for it. So like, we're not going to build a huge business out of this. So we learned a lot, and really we failed a lot with that software in terms of, how do we approach certain things like growth, customer support? We just had no idea. So we decided, we got a great audience here. We have a hunger to build something more impactful. What's the next thing we would want as a seller? And that came down to repricing. And so we're like, cool, this is going to be tough. It's going to be awesome. And we have to differentiate ourselves and stand out and figure it out. And that's what we did. So James pretty much locked himself in a room for 8 or 9 months, 80 hours a week, and just went ham. I mean, I couldn't help because I'm not an engineer. So, I just kind of kept things going. And at that time, or around that time, we actually launched the Wholesale Made Easy podcast. It was like the first Amazon podcast related solely to wholesale, and grew that pretty well. It's no longer running. I'm not a seller anymore. So it's kind of seemed odd, but it was awesome. So we grew that out, and, we launched Aura. I flew to Amherst, where he was during our winter break between classes. And we launched that week. We launched Aura that week. I flew back home, and we got back to building. And yeah, it's been a roller coaster. It's a lot.
Damn.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a good story, though.
In saying it, I'm like, I'm kind of tired now.
Well, honestly, you just kept going. Like, it was like you just kept moving along, plugging through.
Dude, it's a lot. And so we really, in hindsight, it sounds awesome, but it wasn't by design. We took this stepper approach, where we just learned a lot in one area and said, okay, we kind of figured this out. Where can we apply it at a higher level? And we've just been iterating up and up and up. And that's really helped us as a company. I mean, we're a sizable company now, fully bootstrapped. So we didn't raise any money. And really, I mean, we got to a massive size with just 3 of us. I mean, it's incredible. And we continue to grow. And there's 2 of us actively working on Aura. We're building out a larger team now. But yeah, it's been incredible. We've been incredibly lean. We've been incredibly, effective in terms of how we approach each thing that we do, whether it's growth, customer support. I mean, I did all the customer support for the first 2 years as a founder. And I had an advisor tell me, oh no, you need to outsource that. I'm like, no, like I don't know enough about it to do that. How do I dictate what is success and what is not? Right. And it's like, that's your first line of feedback. That's the best thing I could be doing. And so, yeah, it's been awesome. We've learned a ton, absolutely a ton. And what's funny is, like, when I was a seller, I was completely overwhelmed and daunted by repricing, because I thought it was for large sellers. I'm like, oh, that's for when you're up there, And it's like, not the case. Like, so not the case. And it's crazy. This is one of the things that I love about coming on to podcasts or with our affiliates. We teach. I mean, it was a fundamental problem to me, realizing how much data we had and other repricing tools had, and they didn't teach. Like, here's what works, here's what doesn't work, right? Like, be opinionated based on like the data you have. And so that's what we've been doing. We're very opinionated about what strategies work and what strategies don't work. We're very opinionated about when repricing matters and when it most certainly does not. So we take a slightly different approach when it comes to the business side of it.
I want to dive into all the repricing stuff for sure. Well, I want to get into, because I've got so many questions about it.
Sure.
But before we do, I want to go back, because so your stories, I mean, Chris and I have really similar. I mean, we didn't do this together. We met later on, but we both did retail arbitrage and online arbitrage.
Yep.
And people always ask, hey, I want to get started selling on Amazon, whichever way they want to go, private label or wholesale. And we always say, go buy something and flip it. And and if you do that, you learn 90% of the process that would like really kind of catch you up if you were trying to start for like it's
the fundamentals, right? It's
like covering barcodes and all the things that you need. And like you said, picking off, the Walgreens
Target stickers, man.
Says, 50% off. You got to
for sure.
For sure, the first one comes off like crazy, and the other like 900 you bought take forever to scrape off.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you learn.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of sellers that I've talked with, it's month 0 for them, and they're like, "Well, I'm just thinking about scale." I'm like, "Hey, listen, I get it. I'm the scale guy. I'm the operations dork. I'm the automation nerd." But the simple fact is, what a lot of sellers do, which is fundamentally wrong, is they focus on efficiency over effectiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when you do that? You become efficiently ineffective. Doesn't work, right? Effectiveness has to come first. So it's like, you should always be thinking through like, okay, how do I do this with 10,000 units per month versus just the 100 I'm doing? Yeah, you should think through that. But if you haven't listed or sold anything yet, you're not quite there. Like, you need to understand a few basic things. It's the whole, crawl before you walk, before you run. A lot of people think that's incredibly slow, but it's actually not. What you're doing is you're building momentum. You're not going to go from 0 to 1. It's not binary like that, right? It's easy for a lot of newer sellers, especially if this is their first business, to think that black and white, right? It's either you're crushing it or like you're not doing it, but that's not the case. Talking with a lot of sellers that they get sizable and they're like, "What do I do now?" I'm like, "Well, you actually have a business problem. Like you didn't do any accounting. Like that's a problem. Like you haven't even paid taxes yet." Right. And so it's okay to kind of step back and be like, "Okay, real talk. I've never done this before. I have no clue what I'm doing." And that's fine. Right. You don't need to be the next guru in the space. You don't need to be the person in Facebook groups sharing incredible growth rates. Like that's awesome. That comes at some point, but focus on what really matters, which is building a business first and foremost. Because if you're not here in a year, it doesn't really matter. And it's not that exciting.
We see the same thing on advertising. Like
I'm sure.
Think they want to blow up. It's like, well, we got to take this in steps here. You got to get your listings figured out first before you even talk about.
But that's not fun, it's not sexy. It's like, well, I mean, it's business.
Yeah.
What I want to touch now on, because this is the question I always love to ask wholesalers. How do you find suppliers? What brands are you going after? What is your methodology to do that? Like, what were you doing to find all these unique products to sell?
Because it's got to be harder now than it was years ago.
Yes and no. So I'll explain the difficulties, now versus earlier. So simply, you go to Amazon, find good categories, you find good products, and then you contact the brands and you say, "Hey, I'd like to work with you." That's it. That's the whole shebang. Now we can get into the subtle nuances here, but fundamentally that's it. Right. So I'm reverse engineering. This is called reverse sourcing, right? You find listings and products that are already doing well, and then you go and find the brands, and then you plug into that demand, right? You go get the supply, plug into the demand. And there's different ways you can do this, right? Some people specialize in finding brands that are not on Amazon. They bring them on. They kind of treat it like private label. They try to get exclusive, deals. You can work with distributors. Absolutely. That works as well. For me, my specialty was working directly with brands. Now, I'm not talking Nike, right? I'm not contacting Nike on the phone and be like, "Hey guys, I'd like to, start working with you." No, I'm finding brands that they're big enough to elicit enough sales volume, but not so big that they won't take my phone call, which is like a wide spectrum, right? It's different, but you do it enough, you start to kind of pick up little cues of like, okay, this one's big, but it's not that big. It's got enough branding recognition that people are searching for their brand specifically, but not so much that it's absolutely insane and they're in, every CVS and Walgreens that exist. So that's pretty much it. I mean, where a lot of people get stuck with wholesale and why it's so difficult, is the interaction part. So RAOA is transactional. I don't need to have a relationship with anybody to run that business. When you're talking wholesale, it's B2B, right? Business to business. It's straight up relationships. And a lot of these brands are very old school. They want you to call. They want, I mean, to be frank, some of the accounts I used to have, I would have to fax them orders. It's old school, right? And so it took a lot for me to realize I can't just sit here and send out emails and expect anything. And I did the math, by the way. If you look at the conversion rates from sending emails, which I could get basically an approval rate, meaning that they allowed me to open an account of 10% for emails. If I called, I get a 40% conversion rate. So 4 times the amount. Now it takes a lot more effort to do phone calls. It's a lot more uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm personable, but I'm not really outgoing as a personality type. And it's cold calling. I mean, at the end of the day, it is fundamentally sales. And so you got to understand, how do you deal with objections? What are the objections, right? And the first one you call, you're like, I have no idea how this is going to go. It's fine. So what I would usually recommend is find 10 brands, call them, expect nothing but knowledge, right? You're just trying to figure out of a sample of 10 brands, what are they going to ask me? And when you don't have an answer, you go, I haven't really thought about that. I'll follow up with you. You write it down. The next call, they go, hey, same question. You go, actually, because you looked it up between calls and now you sound like an expert, right? So you're learning very quickly, and you're understanding what to say with certain objections and how to very easily handle them to increase your conversion rate. Here's where it also gets difficult. Just because you got the account does not make it profitable. So I used to get excited every time they'd be like, yeah, we'd love to have you. I'd scan through, 30, 50, hundreds of SKUs and be like, there's no profit here whatsoever. Doesn't work. Even negotiating doesn't work. And so you get kind of defeated, but you have to realize, okay, it's just a step in the funnel, right? But once you understand your conversions, then it's just math, right? It's literally just reverse engineer. If you want to add 1 new profitable SKU per week, how many brands or how many new accounts do you need to open? How many new accounts, on average, do you see be profitable? And you just back that out. And then you go, great, how many do I need to call this week? And then right. So it's not sexy. Like that's the hard part. I think a lot of people, when they first jump into wholesale, get stuck at. They think, oh, I see these massive numbers, huge SKUs. You guys are moving, tens of thousands of units. Super simple. I mean, heck, I didn't even touch my inventory. All my stuff went through prep centers because I wanted to run the whole thing from a Chromebook. I was like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm in school, right? I don't want to, at that point, I didn't want to build out a warehouse or anything like that. I was like, I just want to be one person and I want to be super efficient. And so it's tough because a lot of sellers love being on the computer, analyzing sales or being on their phone and, refreshing Seller Central. But what fundamentally moves the needle for a wholesale business is getting on the phone. I mean, I had another rule. I'm a fan of setting rules for myself where I wasn't allowed to do anything else, even place restock orders until I called at least 10 brands every single day. Because I realized if I had that kind of volume, I could pretty much add 1 new profitable SKU each week. And that was fine for me, for my capital. So yeah, is it highly scalable? Yeah, absolutely. But you fundamentally find yourself in one of 2 phases. Phase 1 is always going to be, I have some, if not a ton of capital and not enough inventory. So your biggest problem is actually, how do you source? And it's not just like sourcing like it is with OARA, right? It's how do you find brands, contact them, convert them, place initial orders for testing. You got to figure out that flow, that system. But once you get good at doing that, and you can sit down for 5-6 hours a day and generate a nice list and know exactly what you're doing, then the problem actually becomes capital, because you're like, I'm spending all my inventory. I mean, I got to a point where I had to stop buying certain SKUs because they would make 10%, but another new SKU would make 15%. And I had limited capital, right? So now I'm kind of hacking the ROIs here. And I started to play with, how do I increase the average ROI per SKU? Because I didn't want to raise money or anything like that. And I wasn't a huge fan of net terms back then, just because it was a lot more complexity for me, just being in school full time. So I was just like, I want to pay up front and be done with it. So, that's kind of my perspective on wholesale. It's fantastic. Private label, and this is just, I've never done private label, so like take this with a grain of salt. Private label to me is a fantastic thing for getting up and running, and then being able to exit at a nice multiple, like sell that business. I think it's awesome. And eventually, obviously, yeah, a lot of people hold these private label brands and like cash flow them, and that's fantastic. But that takes time, right? I mean, that could take a year. So for people that are in a position where they're like, I want to jump into this and I really want to leave my job, go wholesale. And I'll give you two reasons. One,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope,
yeah. So one, the cash flow happens within 60 to 90 days. If you understand what you're doing and hit the ground running, you are cash flowing, right? It's not like a longer time horizon to start being able to take some money out. You realistically can. It depends on how quickly you want to grow and how much capital you have. Two, there's an interesting strategy that pulls wholesale and private label together in a cool way. So I mentioned earlier, I like unlimited at bats. I don't like the whole, I got $2,000, let's hope it goes well, and it's the first time you've ever done it. Not a huge fan of that. So when people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to get into this, I don't know which route to go, and I don't have a ton of capital, what do? I go, okay, you got $2,000. Go do wholesale. Because the likelihood of you getting an ROI on the first bat, much higher. Like you still got some stuff to figure out. Don't get me wrong, I've lost money on inventory too. But you figure it out and it's repeatable, right? So if I find a SKU that's good this month, it's probably just as good next month. Give or take, we're going to have some price fluctuations here, right? Repricing. But then what's great is you can take the profits from that model and then deploy it as experiments for PL. So you have a recurring thing that's kicking off cash flow month after month. So each month you could test a new private label product, right? So you go to try one and it doesn't hit. You go, that's fine. I lost, but guess what? I still have a business and I got more capital next month to get back at it and learn. So instead of just betting it all on black, as an example, you go, no, I'm going to build something that is recurring, that can kind of be self-sustainable. And then when PL hits, fantastic, I got a huge upside here, right? This is the whole like Nassim Taleb, like barbell strategy, right? I'm super conservative with wholesale, but I'm going to make private label bets because when they do hit, they really hit. That's awesome. So, I think being a little bit more strategic about it is fantastic.
I would agree. When we talked to some people, and Dustin and I did the whole retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, but wholesaling, I think, gives you an advantage because now you know what the market wants, right? So let's say you sell, you sell an item, and you're selling like crazy. You can go find a similar item that you're selling, and now you can create a private label brand because you already know it sells well through your wholesaling account. You're not having to start from scratch to see if it's selling well. So I always think wholesaling does give you an advantage because you're doing like product research at a smaller budget. You're not risking a whole bunch. You're just testing out different products.
Yeah, for sure.
I ask that question every time because I'm just fascinated by the wholesale model. And like I said, I've tested it around. You'd mentioned before there's like another model where the products don't actually exist on Amazon yet. You can find people that sit there selling whether it's brick and mortar or any of those get the exclusive. That's sort of, I guess I would consider that wholesale as well. That's sort of what I'm testing out right now is doing that. But then that has the added element of it's still that private label mentality. You're creating the listing. You got to make sure, you got to drive advertising to it because it's going to, that you create that listing and it exists, down there on page 35 of the search results because it doesn't have the velocity yet. So it's such a really unique, I think it's a fun model. I may have to do the reach out to 10 suppliers. I like
I'm telling you, a
lot of people, they go through distributors and then or places where it's easier, I would guess, to get wholesale products, but then all that's doing is squishing your margins down because you and 10,000 other people are doing that. It's really interesting that you actually start on Amazon and then work back.
Yeah. So there's two major strategies I used to follow. One is reverse sourcing, which we talked about, right? Which is you find a great listing and you work backwards to find the supply, right? You work with the brands. And then there's leaf sourcing. So this one's cool.
I've heard
one of my favorite ones.
This sounds familiar.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, if I find a product that is good enough for me, like you can kind of tell if a product's good for wholesale or not, just by looking at it. But I would basically look at all the competitors on that listing. I would jump into their storefronts, and I could tell you if somebody's wholesale, RA, OA, or private label, right? You just look at their inventory. And if they're wholesale, I'd be great. I'm gonna look at everything else you sell, and I'm gonna go contact those brands, because my strong suit was being able to build the relationships and add value, right? So a lot of people with wholesale think, well, I'm trying to give you $10,000. That's value add. And they told me, no, it's not. Capital is not unique anymore, right? Like in the early days, it was awesome because all of a sudden, some random human being wants to give you $20,000 for B2B wholesale. And you're like, this sounds fantastic as a small brand. Now it's commonplace, right? So you got to look for added value. So, I would do listing optimization, right? Because I'm not looking at flips. Amazon's not a flipping game. A lot of people come from eBay into Amazon. They're like, I'm trying to flip it. I'm like, no, build a base, man. Build a portfolio of products. I mean, you can do $250,000, in annual sales with 12 SKUs in wholesale. I mean, that's fantastic. That's not a whole lot of maintenance. So I would even run PPC. I would talk to all the brands. Hey, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking at PPC, because if I have enough profitability in terms of dollars, I'm going to run it, because if it's profitable, why wouldn't I? Right. So I'm not trying to come in and be like, hey, I think I can move 30 units per month with you with the volume that's already there and selling. I go, my goal is that by month 3, 6, 9, so on and so forth, I am personally moving more units than anybody else. So with wholesale, you got to consider the volume is the volume. So by adding a 10th or a 9th competitor on a listing, that doesn't add any more value for the brand, right? The brand goes, great, now I'm just selling the same volume to 10 people instead of 9. Honestly, I would rather just work with 9. But you got to be able to come in and say, hey, here's what I'm going to do to increase the slice of the pie. I don't care about moving 30 units per month. Like I think I can just plugging in. I want to move 60 and 90. And here's the process I'm thinking about moving through this. And there's different strategies for that, right? So I'm taking this hybrid approach where with RAOA, you don't really care about that. You're just like, list it, sell it, move on. And that's fantastic. For wholesale though, it is a little bit more private label, right? I am considering PPC, listing optimization. I am taking a little bit more ownership. I am thinking about how do I increase the sales over time. A lot of sellers don't do this, right? So when sellers go, wholesale is kind of tough. Like, is it harder than other ones? Yeah. But tough how? Because it takes a lot of work? Yeah. But I mean, listen, building any business is tough. It takes time, right? It takes effort. And what's great is like, I like the fact that it's harder. I like the fact that it's gotten harder, to be honest. I mean, Dustin, you mentioned this earlier. It's like, just because it's an easy account to open doesn't mean anything. It means it's easy for anybody, right? If you sent one email and the person came back was like, approved, done, come on in, nothing's going to be profitable, because I guarantee you 30 other sellers did the exact same thing and got the exact same result. Why? Because you're not special. You haven't built any relationship to be treated special, right? So I like the first time I call and they hang up on me. I'm like, great. This is tough, because most sellers will stop there and be like, let's move on. But guess what? You follow up 2-3 times. Now you got the account, super profitable, right? And now you have a moat around your relationships, because most Amazon sellers don't want to do that. They're just going to send the email. I'm like, great, keep on sending them. Like, it's fine.
What are some of the hurdles you hear, like the pushback from brands? What are they, when you reach out to them, besides obviously hanging up the phone, what are some other things that they're telling you?
Yeah. It's funny. When I first started calling, I just kept hearing no and no. And eventually I got so frustrated. I was like, just tell me why you hate me. Like, just unload like this, like punching bag, get it. And they did. It was awesome. And then, the next few calls, I just started to reiterate, the positive. So one is like communication. I mean, again, it's such a simple thing and it doesn't seem that impactful, but it really, truly is. I mean, sending an email is not building a relationship. It's just not. It's a good, hey, let's kind of jump in and have a quick conversation. Just want to, I mean, listen, I reach out to you guys via email, right? Like I get it, but what are we doing here? Now we're building a relationship, right? So it can be an entry point to that occurring, but it's not the thing itself, right? It's not the process. So communication is definitely one. I mean, a lot of Amazon sellers just do not act professional. You're dealing with professionals working at pretty decent sized businesses. So if you hit them up and your grammar is terrible, and, listen, I get emails from Amazon sellers all day long. They're 5 paragraphs. And I'm like, send me back 2 sentences because I'm not reading this whole thing. Like, I don't even know you. Right. You got to think about that. And it's not because the person's rude. It's just like, you got to think through, how do you reduce the friction of them wanting to actually communicate with you? Well, turns out getting on the phone, getting them to laugh, showing personality, asking them what's important to them versus just what you want is kind of important. And when you do that correctly, things tend to go your way. 2 is, so many sellers negotiate, hard, because they want the biggest margins, but they want the biggest margins exclusively, right? They're like, hey, I know there's 8 other sellers, but like, I want more. It's like, based on what? You haven't even given me any money yet, right? You haven't even really built enough rapport. And so they'll negotiate an extra 10, 15% and then place a super small order. So the brand's like, wow, you came in, we're very harsh in terms of negotiation before you even place a single order to start this relationship, and then you buy 20 units. How does that make any sense? It doesn't, right? So these subtle things come across very, very wrong. So that's super important. I'm a big fan of saying, yeah, it's not super profitable now, but if I build a good enough relationship and have consistency here, communicate, be super well, or do super well, should I say, I'm going to get that over time.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, just like, everybody's like, you can contact the brand and say, hey, I can do listing optimization, I can make better photos, I can do PPC. That's kind of becoming just white noise now, I think. What are some other things?
Though.
Yeah,
it's the approach, though, right? How do you stand out when everybody can offer the same thing? One, it's by actually doing it. Here's the issue. It's not the fact that everybody's offering it. It's that everybody's offering it and they don't do it. They don't actually follow up. This is the whole relationship building part, right? They say what they need to get the account, and then they go back to being a regular Amazon seller. Stop being an Amazon seller. Be a business owner who happens to sell on Amazon. It's going to shift your perspective, right? So, one of the things I used to do is I would create a 1-pager before I would contact. I'd have it queued up in the email. And if they're like, how's this any different, right? Everybody tells me that. Hey, I just sent you an email. Here's the exact things that I want to do. It's got PPC keywords in it. It's got a few handful of things that I notice on the listing that I'm like, hey, we should do this to increase it. Right. I'm showing that I've actually put in effort before just calling them. This is why the whole email thing doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, you can send 400 emails per day, but why do you need to? Right. Contacting 10 brands per day via phone is very time consuming, especially when you're doing the preliminary research. Now, you can create a structure and a process around this. You can use, a VA, an assistant, whatever, to help you structure this. But listen, man, this is sales 101. Why would I go with one Google Ads agency over another? It's how they approach the relationship, right? It's the level of ownership. You have to be able to demonstrate that in these phone calls, that you care more about the relationship itself than the transaction. Because here's the thing, when you get the relationship right, the transaction takes care of itself, right? Too many sellers immediately jump into, I want to give you money, sell me things. No, it doesn't work that way. You don't even know that that's their biggest problem, right? And so instead of being very assumptuous, ask questions. This is sales 101, right? I'm going to ask you a ton of questions because at the end of the day, I'm trying to get to the root of what you want and then find a way for that to mesh with what I need and then bridge that gap, right? So I would have conversations. Hey, before we kind of get into anything, we'd like to make sure we're a good fit. To work together, we don't just work with anybody, to be honest. The relationship and the depth is very important to us and the longevity of it. What's some of the biggest problems you're having on Amazon? Or what are some of your goals, right? Going into 2022, what's your biggest goals for the channel? What's some of your goals for not the channel, right? What are some of the things that you think are massive opportunities just being missed? You don't have to know all these things. You can ask them. And if they tell you all these things, you're like, actually sounds pretty awesome. I want to take that on. But it's not even that you're considered more of an expert. It's the fact that you asked. And now they're like, nobody's done that. Nobody's actually cared to ask us what we want out of this. They just assumed and it's like, I get it. Everybody wants money. We're in business to make money. But again, the relationship comes first.
It seems like the new shiny object is Walmart and going over and selling on Walmart.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? I know we're talking about Amazon here, but like, it seems like Walmart's in that spot where it's kind of like opening up now, and you can kind of maybe get in early.
Yeah, I have a similar perspective as I do with other marketplaces. In terms of like, other geolocations for Amazon, a lot of sellers are like, oh, I'm gonna go Denmark, I'm gonna go Germany. Like, that's fantastic. But listen, if you haven't optimized and maximized what you're currently able to do with what you currently have access to, why are you starting from scratch again? If it's low barrier to entry and you're like, hey, I got a good wholesale portfolio of SKUs, I'm gonna start talking with my brands about taking them there. I think it's a fantastic thing. It's an add-on, it's a value add. But a lot of sellers think that, oh, well, this is going to change the game. It's not. It's not the singular thing that changes everything, right? Because you still have to have the foundations. Listen, if you can't make it work on Amazon.com, you're not going to make it work on Walmart, because you're not approaching it correctly, right? It's like, if that was the only thing that changed you making it versus you not making it, then that's also true for everybody else. Right? It's like, you got to overcome the hard parts, the parts that people get stuck at, the parts that people don't want to push through. Get good at that part, because that becomes your differentiator. That becomes the whole, well, is Amazon just saturated? No, there's a crap ton of sellers. But here's the thing. It's a low barrier to entry, but it's a higher barrier to succeeding, no matter what the business model is, right? Whether it's RAOA, wholesale, private label, anybody can get started. So people think, oh, there's so many sellers. I'm like, yeah, but how many are you actually competing with? That's my issue, right? I've had, sellers, when I was doing live sourcing, joke like, oh, could you, just show me your storefront? I was like, honestly, I could show you all the brands I work with. You're not going to get the accounts, because I'm telling you right now, you're not going to be willing to go through what you have to get the accounts opened. I mean, that's awesome. It's a good position to be in.
You bring up so many good points. Sorry, I interrupted you, Chris, there, but
no,
I think a lot of people think there's just this magic online catalog of products that they can just go to check. I want these, and these, and then you start wholesaling them. And there's similar things like that, but like you said, I mean, that's where everybody's going. And that's where everyone's doing like the half-assed job of trying to create a business. And you really highlight a good point. I mean, that it's in the relationship, it's getting it, and then you create these long-term deals. That's fascinating. Before I go to a different topic, Chris, did you want to ask something?
I was just going to say, for somebody who was labeled learning disability, I think you proved them wrong. I mean,
yeah, I appreciate it. I'm trying.
Yeah, you're impressively laying this out. Let's put that.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. A lot of hard work. That's for sure.
Put it lightly. Yeah, you clearly know what you're doing, and you have a passion for what you're doing, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about repricing and Aura. I guess to segue into that.
Sure.
At what point, when you were, growing this wholesale business, did you either know about repricing already, or realize, hey, this is a big part of the game? And how big of an impact, was that the main focus for a while? I mean, there's all kinds of things too, because did you have contracts that were like that they had map pricing that you couldn't reprice?
Absolutely. For sure.
Touch on repricing just in general and through your journey, what it looked like.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, it just felt like out of my grasp, because one, it was so daunting. I'm like, I don't know how this works. Like, it seems like magic. There's strategies. What does that mean? There's so much to learn. And so I put it off for a long time. And in hindsight, I'm like, the amount of money I gave up by not doing it is stupid, because now I have the data. To keep things in context, we tend to see a 20 to 40% increase in sales while maintaining a healthy net ROI for sellers coming to Aura. Like, that's stupid, like in the best of ways, right? And it's like, the fact that I waited so long to like start testing it for my own business back in the day was kind of embarrassing. So, I was kind of playing around with it at the time. But I've had a few forks in the roads, as I'm sure you've noticed already in life. Aura took off and started to grow very fast, like could not keep up fast. And so I had another fork in the road. I was like, what do I want to do here? I can't do both. I mean, I'm in school full time. I walk into a final right after receiving an email that Amazon lost $8,000 in inventory. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to jive super well for my personality type. Like, I'm fine with stress, but I don't like it all piled up at once. Like, that's just not who I am. So I was like, okay, what do I do? And I thought about it long and hard, and I decided, you know what? What's more scalable, software or wholesale? And for me, it was software. I realized I wanted to start and run a software company, and I had a passion for that as well. And so I made a tough decision. I could have, kept it going, started hiring people, and I was like, I got to be singularly focused. That's just who I am as a person. I can't go super wide here. And so that's what I did. I let all my inventory sell through, let all my brands know, here's what's going on. They're like, hey, get it, all good. If anything changes, let us know. I let everything sell through, took my last payout. I was like, cool, we're good here. And went full blast on Aura, and we've been growing since. And it was the best decision I could have ever made, to be honest. I mean, I've taught wholesale. We had the Wholesale Made Easy podcast. Like, I get it. I try to let people know, so Amazon's a great thing for people to start their first business in. And I mean, listen, people build incredibly large businesses here. That's awesome. I think it's a good platform to figure some things out, to learn a lot, get the fundamentals right, and then get enough confidence to say, you know what I've always really wanted to do though? Software. Go do that here, right? Because you get the context now. Whether it's a service-based business, right? I mean, starting a prep center. I mean, there's so many opportunities here that people miss. And it's always got to be, look, why I have to be a seller? I'm like, not really. Like, you get the market now. You get the industry now. Look for other opportunities that might be, just in parallel, but go super well with it. Initially I was kind of like, oh man, how's this going to hit to the audience we've built it? But I was like, hey, I'm owning it. This is my decisions, my life. It made the most sense. And I couldn't regret it, at all. It was fantastic. So, it's funny. I went from not utilizing repricing as much as I should have in my own Amazon business to running one, and learned so many things, like so many misconceptions. I mean, you guys know as well as I do, the Amazon communities are incredibly opinionated. And right, you're like, yeah,
Yes, they are.
Right. It doesn't matter the model, right? And all the things I was told, related to repricing, I believed, because I had no way to confirm or deny it. But on this side of it, I'm like, yeah, that's hurting Amazon sellers is what it's doing. And we see it day in and day out. We have sellers jump in with some of these preconceived notions. They're kind of afraid. And I'm like, hey, like, I can work you through this. It's all good. Just, let's test it for a week. If we're talking about a specific type of strategy, and then they come back 3 days later, like, I should have done this years ago. It all makes sense now. It all clicks. And, so one of the things we wanted to do was take this ephemeral thing that seems very complex for sellers, and make it super easy to do. And so whenever we're teaching things, we try to boil it down. When we're talking strategies, which ones do you need? Which ones work well and which ones don't? We talk about it straight up. We try to not get into the nitty gritty of all the craziness of it. Cause yeah, it can be absolutely advanced and custom strategies and all that stuff. But we're like, hey, let's focus on what gets 80% of your inventory to the next level. Put that on autopilot to free up more time to go source. That's a solid win for us. And we tend to see sellers grow exponentially once that process begins to occur.
What would something like that? What is that 80% chunk?
Yeah, sure.
What's that look like?
Yeah. So I'm about to trigger a ton of people, so get ready for this. So we are huge fans of the oscillation strategy. This works for the vast majority of your inventories, right? So I'm going to recommend 2 strategies here that we see do really, really well. The oscillation strategy. So an oscillation is just a wave, right? It goes up and down, up and down. When you look at the buy box, it tends to do something very similar for anything that has multiple sellers on it, right? We're not talking private label here. That's its own beast. But for anything that's resale related, you tend to see this. Now, they might look like big jumps because that tends to happen, but ultimately it's a wave, just going up and down. And so what we want to do is we want to increase the volume of sales, right? Amazon, whether it's RAOA wholesale, it's a volume game, right? So let's take one step back. Your Amazon business is a compound equation. Okay. It's not about getting the highest ROI period, because here's what ends up happening. You go for double the ROI. You want 100% ROI, but you hold it for 3 months. What you could have done is you could have sold it in 2 weeks, done that again, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, up until that same 3-month period. You made more net profit from a compound perspective, from an ROI perspective, as well as literally dollars. Okay. And there's opportunity costs, right? So that's that delta between, yeah, but I could have got 100% on that one unit versus you could have sold 30 units within that same period of time, right? So instead of making $20 for that one unit, you within the 30, you made 120, right? You literally made more money in the same period of time. Okay, so with that context, we want to increase the volume of sales to, avoid opportunity costs, to avoid long-term storage fees, right? To be liquid, to have more capital. Fun fact, a lot of sellers can't grow and they're like, I need more capital. I'm like, no, you just need to sell inventory that's been in your account for 6 months. Like there's 20 grand here. Super, super important. So how do we do that though? You got to reprice below the buy box to get it. It's just like, this is the trigger. A lot of sellers, including myself, were told, if you reprice below by a penny, you're an idiot. You don't understand what you're doing. You're a noob. That is completely incorrect. I look at the data, see it daily. It is wrong. Here's the thing. Price changes are good. They happen in markets all day long, right? Watch a stock in the private market on the NASDAQ, all over the place. Although that doesn't happen at that frequency, it still needs to occur, right? So supply, demand, basic economics. How do we increase sales? You lower the price. That's also true on Amazon. But that's not just a good thing by itself, right? Because now, so in the oscillation, we're talking about lowering it to increase the volume, but I am lowering your price. And so sellers go, well, now you're tanking it and I'm losing money. One, you're not losing money. Okay. Because you weren't selling it to begin with in most cases, right? You're losing some potential upside, but that's not the case. So to complete the oscillation, this cycle, we want to reprice from our minimum price to our maximum price. So we want a tight range here between our min and our maxes. A lot of sellers set massive ranges. Doesn't work. Just because you put $1,000 as your maximum price in case somebody wants to buy it for $1,000 does not mean anybody is ever going to buy a $20 item for $1,000. So we keep this tight. Why do we do this? When we reset to our max price, we are increasing the average net profit per unit, right? Ideally, we're maintaining where it has been. That's pretty good. So if you've been making $10 per unit, I want you to stay around there while increasing the volume of sales. That's a solid win for me. So whenever you reset to your max price, a few things can and will happen. Either the other seller you're competing with or sellers you're competing with also have repricing tools, in which case they will follow you back up, because no repricing tool wants you stuck at a lower price when it could be higher. We're just taking advantage of that. Two, human nature. How many sellers listening to this have refresh Seller Central on their phone, been like, oh, cool, I got the buy box. Wait, that's $20. The next lower seller is at 30 and you go to 28. It's going to happen. Or what I used to intentionally do with wholesale, I could tell you have 20 units. I've got 300. I'd push you down, jump back up. You didn't follow me. I'd be like, that's fine. I'll give you the buy box as long as you need to sell those 30 units at a lower price, so that you go, oh, this idiot just tanked the buy box. I go, sure. And then you don't restock. And then I pull it back up and I carry it for the next 12 months, right? People that go repricing below by a penny is stupid are not seeing the long-term strategy here. People want to increase the volume of sales while increasing the net profit at the same time. It doesn't work. It goes against economics. So let's use what we have available to us to our advantage. We increase the volume by going down. We increase the net profit or the average net profit by going back up and resetting and looping back through this. If you do that, especially if you're RAOA and you don't go super deep, and by super deep, I mean hundreds of units per SKU, you're gonna love it. Like, because I'm not talking about dropping your price, $5, $10. In some cases, when you have 2-3 units, I'm talking dropping it like 20 cents. And listen, if 20 cents is a make or break for you on a SKU, you're buying wrong, right? So when we can do that, I mean, that's covering the vast majority of our inventory and moving things so quickly. And we don't have cash flow problem anymore. Cash is just coming back in, right? And at a healthy net profit per unit. So one of the things we recommend here is understand what minimum ROI you are willing to accept. And by minimum, I mean, literally, you're not excited about it, but you'll take it all day long. You'll take it. For most wholesale people, that's going to be between 15 and 20%. If I can get that all day long, hey, it's all good. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put a system in place, an automation in place that understands the boundaries that I'm comfortable with, maximizes it as much as I can, while also increasing the volume of sales, because I need that too, and then letting it take care of itself, right? So I'm going to say, hey, at minimum, I want 20% ROI. I'll take any sale at 20% all day long. I don't want to wait an extra week to get 30 if I can get 20 today because of compound, right? So that's strategy number one. That's going to take you like the majority of the way there. Strategy number two is liquidation. Nobody likes to talk about liquidation. Listen, you're going to make bad buys. It happens. A lot of sellers will hold inventory, very similar to stocks. This is a sunk cost fallacy, where you go, I bought it for 20. It's selling for 15. I'm going to wait. Okay, here's the deal. You're going to end up waiting 3 to 6 months for it to potentially get back up, or for you to just be like, you know what, whatever, liquidate it anyways. What you could have done is got your 15 back today, realize you made a bad buy, learn from it, redeploy it into something profitable, and make that extra 5 back on the next SKU. So what I tend to recommend is after a certain period of time, whether that's 2, 3, 4 weeks, it's up to each individual seller, kind of where they fit in here. Switch that SKU over to a liquidation strategy. Now, it's going to operate the same way as an oscillation. However, the minimum ROI goes down to 0. It's not about making money right now. It's about getting your money out so that you can redeploy it profitably. If you have these two strategies, so the oscillation strategy and a liquidation strategy, 80% of your inventory should be completely automated and taken care of. The extra 20% is really just getting down into a specific listing or a specific listing type. But again, I don't think you need a ton of strategies. I see sellers with 13 strategies and like 30 SKUs. I'm like, this is too much. Keep it simple.
That's interesting. Are those two strategies easy to set up in Aura?
Very easy. Yeah. We designed Aura from a user perspective to be, you can jump in and be repricing in 10 minutes. Assuming your listing started to roll in, obviously you got to go through the MWS connection process. Yeah, done. I mean, super easy. We've got videos on this and me teaching. We walk you through it. Heck, you could reach out to support. So we don't outsource anything. We don't have any VAs in the company. Finn, who's actually sitting over there, is doing support right now. You can reach out to Finn and be like, Finn, I want the oscillation strategy, minimum 20%. I want a liquidation strategy. Can you create it for me? He'll be like, yep, give me 10 minutes. We'll get you sorted out. I mean, like we literally do work for users, because we get that, we try to make it as simple as possible, but we do understand that it can be cumbersome to jump in, because there can be a lot of decision fatigue. So we're like, hey, we'll jump into your account, we'll create it real quick, and then you can take over from there. Like, we teach as much as we do externally, internally. So yeah, it's not difficult. That's the fun bit, man. It's like, we aim to make it so simple that when a seller jumps in and they have been kind of daunted and putting it off, once they're up and running and they're repricing, they're like, oh, that's actually really easy, like almost boringly easy. It's like, yeah, absolutely, it should be that. And then obviously, if you want to go more in depth and get a little bit more advanced, you can go that route. Like, we have a workflows feature. So, you can create your own automated rules in Aura and say, hey, this is what I want you to do for my SKUs. Just do it for me. Whether that's pausing repricing, taking your prices to your max at midnight, whether that's, switching strategies, we can have that as well. So it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be, but I think it should be as simple as possible when you're first getting started, and you build upon that.
So there's always a myth, like, how do I win the buy box? How do I get the buy box more? How do I get how can I get the buy box? What are some things that Amazon, it's probably a black hole, but what are some things Amazon looks at when comparing sellers and who gets the buy box?
Sure.
I got questions here for after you answer that.
Yeah, they don't exclusively say like it's this weight for this weight for that, right? It kind of switches over time. Like when COVID first kicked off, being merchant fulfilled actually superseded being FBA, and that used to absolutely not be the case. So it kind of shifts. For me, what we've noticed is like, you got to have your fundamentals right for your account, right? If you got bad feedback, can't do anything for. I mean, we have had sellers come in and have like 1 star across the board for their seller account, and they're like, "Hey, OR's not working for me," and I'm like, "We can't. No repricer can work for you. I can reprice you all day long, but Amazon's not going to put you in the buy box. Like, you're a liability now, right?" So one, merchant fulfilled as a higher weight has gone away slowly over time, because we don't have logistics issues anymore. So being FBA, super helpful. However, it's not that much greater as a merchant fulfilled offer, because now merchant fulfilled offers with regional buy boxes, and we're not able via the API to reprice regional buy boxes, meaning if I have inventory that's merchant fulfilled, I live in North Dakota and you're in North Dakota buying, you're probably going to see me. It's totally fine. Most merchant fulfills can do 2-day shipping anyway. So like there's less competition on the shipping side. Not everybody does though. So it depends. So one, shipping time, fulfillment time, that's incredibly important, as low as possible. That's why FBA tends to be a great fit. Just ship it in there. We're all good. They'll spread it around for you. So seller feedback, incredibly important. Number of SKUs can actually help a ton, not necessarily on the global buy box, but I'm sorry, number of units per SKU. By having more inventory per SKU, you end up being spread out more and being more eligible for regional buy boxes. So I had a friend who does wholesale. She was moving like, I think it was 90 units a month. And she's like, I just sent in 200 to see what would happen. And all of a sudden she's getting a lot more regional buy boxes. We're not helping with that, of course. But that tended to help quite a bit with sales, which is fantastic. So that's a nice little hack there. And then pricing. I mean, at the end of the day, what does Amazon want, and what's the best price possible? Why? Because that increases sales. It comes back down to basic economics. So gotta have a good price. Now, it does not mean that the lowest is going to win. That's not the case, right? It's a collection of these things. You can be the lowest price offer and have terrible feedback, and Amazon's not going to care. I have seen a good offer that was much, much lower than everybody else and still not getting the buy box, right? So there's a healthy range here. And I don't know exactly what that percentage is because they don't make that very obvious, but you know, it's like 80, I would say like 85 to 90% math and then 10% just whatever Amazon decides to allow. Like, you know, repricing against Amazon on a listing is a great example. People are like, oh, I crush Amazon all the time. I'm like, yeah, but I have users that don't. It depends on the listing at that level, right? And that can be part of that extra 20% of your inventory I was talking about. So it depends. Some listings, Amazon's willing to let you in. Others, they're like, you can reprice all day long. We got inventory to move. We don't care. So there is that 10% where it's just like, we'll see what happens and we'll just play with it. But fun fact about the oscillation strategy, I was working one-on-one with a user. They had this one seller super aggressive, like just crushing it. He's like, I don't know what to do. I was like, well, let's at least see if we can have some fun here in an experiment. So using the oscillation strategy, we actually increased the the average buy box price by $3. So we would go down the moment, and basically like, as we started to go down, I would raise his max by like 20 cents. And then when we would go up, I would raise his min by 20 cents. And when every cycle, I would sidestep it up. And the other person's repricer kept following us as well. And so I was like, well, hey, you know, even though I can't move a ton more inventory for you, we can at least put you in a better position, because he didn't have a ton of units for that SKU anyways. It was like 30. I was like, we're not moving it so high that we're getting rid of the volume, but you're at least getting a little bit more for your work. So I mean, again, people think repricing below by a penny or going down period is terrible. I'm like, actually, if you think about the strategy a little bit more, you can increase the buy box over time. So there's a ton of opportunity there.
This is crazy. This is fun.
That regional buy box is crazy.
I know. I want them to release an API for us to play in that realm. They just haven't, and I don't think they will, because it's honestly, if you think about it, it's incredibly complex. Mm-hmm. But no, it's super cool.
Man, there's so much more to talk about. I think this deserves a second episode.
Yeah, we can do a part 2.
We got to get you back on. Yeah, every time, Chrissy, you can back me up on this. We talk wholesale, I get all excited again about knowing. And maybe I need to be more like you, Dillon. You have this innate ability to like block everything else out and go one track.
Yeah.
I don't. I go like 12 tracks at the same time.
You just got set rules, man.
So I got too many things rolling on, but thanks so much for joining us. Tell everybody right now, how can they get started with Aura?
Yeah, so go to GoAura, that's GOAURA.com. We have a 14-day ungated trial. So that means we don't require a credit card up front. So what I tell people is, if you're less than $5,000 in monthly revenue, it's probably not a good fit for you yet. I don't care about you signing up now. I care about you signing up when it makes sense and you being with us for the next, 3 to 5 years. So don't jump the gun on it. It's not a silver bullet. You have to have enough SKUs, enough volume for it to make sense and have an ROI. We tend to see that make sense right around the 5,000, monthly. If you've been doing that for the past, let's say 2 to 3 months, you're probably in a good position to jump in. And so we're $97 a month, 14-day trial. What I recommend is you jump in, you get set up. Again, we'll help you. Either Finn or I will literally jump into a Zoom call with you and get you sorted out. We recommend that you jump in, make the extra $100 that you would not have made. Let Aura pay for itself before the trial ends, and then you're good to go. And then we can start having fun with, workflows and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, I would recommend jumping in. We have tons of videos. We have tons of help desk articles. Like, we're incredibly customer centric. So set aside your overwhelm for a moment, jump in. Even if you're like, I don't want to do any of it myself, that's totally fine. Reach out to us and support. We'll get you sorted out. Our average response time is like 10 minutes during business hours. So we got you covered. Don't worry. But yeah, just jump in, get signed up.
All right. GoAura.com. Well, I encourage everyone to definitely go check that out, especially if you're selling wholesale and you're hitting that 5K in revenue per month, and you absolutely should be doing it. So GoAura.com. Dillon, man, this has been awesome. We really, really appreciate it. We appreciate your time so much. So thanks again. And everybody listening, if you like content like this, if you love hearing great new strategies, just people's stories like Dillon, how he got started, how he kept moving up from RA to wholesale, now to creating his own software. It's impressive. Make sure you're subscribing to this podcast. So whatever platform you're listening to, subscribe to us, leave us a review, let us know how we're doing. If you like to see these videos live, make sure you're following Solozo on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We go live almost every day with an episode. So make sure you subscribe to those channels as well and turn on notifications so you're notified when we go live. Also, if you're an Amazon seller and you're struggling with your, if you're struggling with your advertising, make sure you go to Solozo.com. You can book a demo. You'll get either Chris or I on the demo, and we can talk all about how Solozo can help automate and optimize your advertising for you. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. Dillon, thanks for joining us, and we'll see everybody.